Growing up in Spokane, Chris Kopczynski fell under nature's spell, aspiring to adventures far, far away.
I wondered what type of rocks the great mountains of the world were made of, so I set my goal to find out. Over the next 50 years, I scaled the great peaks of Robson, Makalu, Choyu, Denali, Everest, and the Eiger.
Into Thin Hair chronicles these journeys, from when he carved the words Everest, Eiger into the handle of his ice axe, marking his goal to climb the two mountains known as the highest and the hardest, and so much more, sharing stories of perseverance and survival. Referred to as America's most underrated mountaineer, he remains rooted in Spokane and committed to conserving the beautiful nature that surrounds us. This is the place I continue to come back to for inspiration, to soothe and heal, and to put my senses in order. Eli Francovich, Spokesman-Review Outdoors editor, leads tonight's conversation with this world-renowned mountaineer in our midst. Please welcome Chris Kopczynski and Eli Francovich to the Northwest Passages stage.
Hey, Chris.
Hi, Eli. Like I said, if I can hear the question, I'll answer it.
Okay, great. If you can't hear it, then we'll just keep going.
All right.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. I've always really looked up to you for your climbing, but also just your whole sort of ethos and philosophy around it. So I'm really happy to be here, sitting here with you today. So.
Well, this is all new for me, Eli. I'm a bit nervous.
Yeah, fair enough. I think everyone looks pretty friendly here, though. So.
Yeah. Feels like a little bit of fireside chat with a lot of the friends I've got here.
Yeah. So you told me that you wrote this book, Into Thin Hair, for your more than 100 first cousins, which I believe is not an exaggeration. And I guess I kind of wanted to start with that. How did your family get here to Spokane? Kind of tell us that story.
My great-great-grandfather came to the United States in 1867. His father grew up in Prussia, and his name was August. My mother's side is German, and he was Prussian, but they had a big family. That my great-grandpa had 5 remaining children in 1906 when he died. He had 35 grandchildren, which was my dad's family, 129 great-grandchildren, and 350 great-great-grandchildren. One of my family had 27 children and 3 wives. So my first cousins, I count 104 first cousins.
Okay. And so they had questions about your climbing life, huh? Is that sort of what led to...
Well, a lot of them were always curious about it, and more than anything, I thought, when I wrote this book, that I wanted to leave, I have 4 children of my own, I wanted to leave a history book, and more than anything, I wanted to leave a history book for Spokane to know what great climbers we had at one time. I mean, we still do,
right.
But I wanted people to know what we did. And I wanted my family to read it, but I was scared to death when I printed the first 50 books. I thought they would sit down in the garage.
And sit down at what?
They'd be sitting down in the garage.
Oh, not go anywhere. Okay, clearly not. So I guess what was your first introduction to climbing, and just tell us that story.
It was about 1959, 1960. I was working for the Spokesman-Review. And before I forget it, I want to thank the Spokesman-Review and Audie's for putting on this production. What an amazing thing. Thank you so much. That was my first job, delivering newspapers. And I read a lot. I read the paper. And I would get up at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning to take these in a big paper bag, which you did. And I had 70 people on a route. And there was this rock we called Fanny Rock. It was a big piece of basalt. It looked like a big butt hanging over the cliff.
Right.
And I went up there one morning to watch the sunrise, and it just struck me that watching the sun come over the horizon, I thought, man, would it be cool to travel to some of the bigger mountains of the world and watch the sun come up and see what it looks like some other place in the world on a big mountain. And then what really crystallized it for me was a family trip. I was about 12 years old to Banff, Alberta, and I saw the mountains. And my dad, and I told my dad, I said, I'd really like to climb up there. I mean, it just was, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to climb.
Attracted you, yeah.
Yeah, and I came back, and so he said, if you're going to learn it, if you're going to do that, you got to go to the Spokane Mountaineers Club and learn how to do it properly. So that's what I did. I learned from the Spokane Mountaineers.
And fairly quickly, you set your sights pretty high, right? You're talking about the north face of the Eiger and Everest, right? And the north face of the Eiger hadn't been climbed by Americans at that point. Is that correct?
No, the north face of the Eiger was in the newspapers quite a bit because it's hard to describe the Eiger. I will try to describe it, but it was a very prominent mountain in Germany and Switzerland on the border there, and it goes 6,000 feet straight up. And a lot of people had tried to climb it, and at the time there had been about 50 people that had tried to climb it, and 25 had died. It was just real notorious for killing climbers.
Right.
So it was in the paper, so I went down to I like to read, and I took out these adventure books, and I bought 2 books. One was called Annapurna, and one was called The White Spider by Heinrich Harr, about the Eiger ascent. And as a youth, I was very strong and very confident. I was confident in my ability, and I just said, I want to be the first one from this country to climb it.
Right.
And so I went home, and the Spokane Mountaineers, you got these big alpenstock ice axes. I carved it into my ice axe. I wanted to climb the Everest and the Eiger. So I was looking at it every day, and subconsciously, that's what I wanted to do.
And how old were you at that point?
I was about 15.
15, okay. And so, that's a bold goal right off the bat, to say the least. But you had some really amazing mentors also right off the bat. I'm thinking of Joe Collins in particular.
Yeah.
Right? And just tell us about him. I mean, he's he has quite his own climbing resume and sort of story.
Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's, I wish he could be here tonight. He's not, his health is not good enough to get down here, but he's 96. But Doug Ryder and Bill Bolton and Will Murray and the crew, Lorna Ream, Bill Fix, they were the mainstay of the Spokane Mountaineers. I had just great mentors besides my dad. But I have to say, that looking back, I was kind of an odd kid.
Why do you say that?
Well, I've done more talking right now about climbing than I have pretty much in my life.
Yeah. You're doing really good. So.
You know, it's hard for me. It was hard for me. It was hard for me in high school. I mean, I'd come back and say I climb Mount Rainier or I climb Mount Athabasca, and everybody, you know.
Right. There's no relationship there.
I went into a shell.
Right.
Except that I knew this is what I wanted to do.
Right.
It was like being in a circus for me. I was pretty athletic in a wrestling team and everything, so that discipline kind of went over in mountaineering.
Well, and one thing that's always struck me about, Spokane generally, but the climbing community here in particular, is there's sort of this blue-collar ethic, it seems like, and it seems like you really embodied that, and Joe Collins certainly did. Can you kind of talk about that, and how all these people were climbing very much within their means, and a lot of weekend trips, if I understand it right?
Well, we were, at the time, in the 60s, it was a tumultuous time, but I grew up working construction all summer long. Ever since I was that high. My dad gave me a hammer and a nail and chisels and stuff since I was a little kid. So that's all how I made my living. And blue collar, I guess you'd call the rest of the people in the Mountaineers, one was a fireman. But bottom line, we all got our recreation on the weekend. And we all worked during the week to make money to go climbing. And that kept up for years and years and years. So it wasn't easy.
Yeah, a lot of balance.
We worked our way up.
Yeah. And then, so when did you, I mean, you had a sort of a legendary partnership with John Russ Kelly and Ken Mom and Jim States. When did those men come into your climbing life, and tell us how that happened?
I went to one of the first Spokane Mountaineers slideshows that Joe Collins was putting on. I think it was in 1965, the spring. And I saw John, and he immediately stuck out because he was, I thought, what the heck is that guy doing here? He doesn't fit in with this group. And he's, I wanted to go tell him. I said, you're in the wrong group, man.
Why did you think that?
Well, he just looked like a hood. I won't say any more than that. I wasn't impressed.
You weren't impressed, okay.
I wasn't impressed. He was kind of skinny and brash, and I was taking it real serious, and I just didn't think he was going to make a serious mountaineer at all. And I met Kim Mom about 5 years later, and then about early 70s I met Jim States, and then we formed the Makalu team. But I knew John, and we really hit it off because Joe Collins took us on a trip to Mount Shuksan, and I got to know John, and John decided, man, he really liked it. And I said, I'm going to have my driver's license next year. Let's knock them all off. Let's get them all.
And that was sort of the start.
That's where it started. Yeah. Russ Gill and I had a really great, I still have a good friendship. And probably the best friend I've ever had. And we still communicate daily. And it's been a long, long road.
Yeah. Look, I mean, looking back, and this is a tough question, I imagine, but what allowed you two to climb so well together and get along so well together? Can you kind of reflect on that at all?
We were both very confident, and we were both very good at it, and we were both competitive at it. And we were learning from the elder people in that group. And at one point, one of the senior people in the Spokane Mountaineers went down to tell my dad that I was heading for trouble because I was really good, but I was way overconfident. And we're going to end up falling and getting hurt. But it never happened.
What did your dad say?
Well, at that time, we were really good. And we said, we're going to go free climb the east face of Chimney Rock.
Right.
And the mountaineer said, have you heard that, that first ascent took 2.5 days, and they were blah, 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 hanging by their fingernails, and we just blew it away, and when we knew it, we went up there, and in 3 hours, we climbed it. And they came up the next day expecting to pick up bodies.
Right. And you're like a teenager still at this point.
Yeah, we were still teenagers. But yeah, we were really good. We knocked off a lot of peaks all over the place.
Yeah.
Really, it was real lot of fun.
And so so in contrast to Ross Kelly, right, you were never sort of a, quote, professional climber. Like, you were always working. And I wonder just how did you balance that? Because to become good at something like this, it's a lot of work, right, a lot of training. But you also had a job and a family. And how did you work that balance?
Well, it was a lot of hard work. John was so good and so gifted that it was natural for him, and his dad was an outdoor writer for the paper, and he was a good writer, and it was more of a natural progression for him. For me, I grew up in the construction business. The only way I knew how to make money was with my hands and with my tools and with my back and the labor, and I graduated that into management. So it was more by nature than by choice. I was naturally good at construction. It was hard work, but developed good grip. I mean,
For climbing, right?
yeah, it
Cross
really
training.
accelerated my climbing, but it also gave me the freedom to have money to do the climbs. And so I made a choice that I would have the money to do it myself instead of becoming a so-called professional. I actually did it professionally for a year, and I hated it.
Oh, really?
I
What?
worked for Eddie Bauer for a year, just traveling around doing slideshows, but I could not, excuse me, I gotta stand up.
Yeah.
I'm not a good sitter.
It illustrates the whole point, I think.
But anyway, I couldn't, I just couldn't stand, doing these clunk side shows, and I'd do it for a couple hundred people, and then I had nothing to do.
Right.
And I was nervous, and I needed to get back into construction so I could sleep at night.
Right.
You can sit down, I gotta stand up.
And so with that balance though, I mean, you had to, I guess I still want to get kind of at that, like how did you balance that, the competing desires and requests on your time? Does that make sense? Like, did you have a strict schedule, or you?
Well, for all things there's a price.
Yeah.
And I sacrificed my family. I was married to Sharon, and I had 2 little kids growing up, and I was so upset. They paid the price. I worked out. During the weekends I was climbing. I still had the Eiger on my mind, and before I got to the actual descent of the Eiger, I went over there by myself to climb the Matterhorn and the Eiger, but all the time, I don't know if I'm answering the question, I would work a week or 2 weeks at a shot and make enough money to go to climb.
Right, to go climb. And
Yeah.
so there was a cost to that, a family cost.
Yes. It hurt me emotionally later in life, and I'm happy to say that my older kids talk to me and still love me.
Yeah.
And they've forgiven me, and I've tried to make up for all the past time that I spent. You can call it selfish, but for me, I had to do it.
Yeah.
It was something I had to do, and whether I prove it to myself or whatever, but I wrote those goals down, and I wasn't going to let them go.
Yeah.
And so I made money to get to them. If that makes sense, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, no, it definitely answers the question.
Yeah,
There's callings in life sometimes, right? And this was your calling.
it was a calling for me, and as strange as it may seem, I've been called crazy all my life. Maybe I feel a little less crazy tonight.
Right, some validation. Yeah. And so kind of going back to purely the climbing side of things, so you climbed obviously in some of the biggest mountains in the world, right? And some the Himalayas and elsewhere, but you trained in rather obscure places, Latah Creek.
Well, I tell you, one of the places I trained was right up in 39th and Grand Boulevard, not Grand, but High Drive. And I had read about Reinhold Messner early on. He was like Arnold Schwarzenegger of popular, and Messner was able to climb 3,000 feet in 30 minutes. And without a pack, he was able to run that fast and do through it. So I went up to 37th and High Drive, and I measured the distance down to Latah Creek, which is about 470 feet in elevation. So I'd run up and down 6 or 7 times with a pack on, and I'd run and do 6 times, and I'd time myself going up.
Right.
So I got down to about 37 minutes on the upside. And then I took it up to Mount Spokane, and I went from Linders, and I would run from Linders Lodge, the old Linders Lodge, to the top of Mount Spokane, and we tried to do that in 30 minutes. Then Ross Kelly was training with me, and Kim Long. But then we'd run Micah Peak and run from the bottom to the top, and then we'd run over Tower Mountain, trespassing all the way.
Right. Right. And could you ever break the 30?
No, I got to 35 minutes, but I couldn't.
Messner remains.
Messner's, whether he was telling the truth or not, I don't know.
Yeah. Right, different question.
But I got close.
And so kind of along those same lines, in your book, you tell this story of the first winter ascent of Chimney Rock, and I mean, man, that's a fairly harrowing adventure, and I just want to hear more about it, basically.
Well, I had climbed Chimney Rock 59 times now, but at the time I had climbed it 35 times, and there was some competition to try to be the first one to do it in the winter. And I talked Ross Kelly into going up there the first time, and I've written about him in the book. That one ended up in failure, and then we tried again. We did climb it on May 1st of 1965, and we considered that a winter ascent, but it really wasn't in the middle of winter.
Right.
Chimney Rock looks like an ice cream cone.
Right.
I mean, it's snow. But I went back up with a guy named John Waterman, and Waterman's were very famous physicists from back east. And Waterman came out here to climb. Climbers were a very tight-knit group, you know, and say, you're climbing this and that. So he flew all the way back from Boston to come out and to try to climb Mount Edith Cavell. We tried to climb that in the middle of winter. We were in college then, and Waterman was so famous because his dad has a crater moon named on the moon for him, on the backside of the moon. But it was a tragic ending in my book. I describe all the, I guess, as anything, my book is a tribute to all the people I climbed with. But Waterman was very, very strong, but we got 2/3 of the way up there and we had to retreat to that. This was all in a week's time, carrying 120 pound on our back, on skis, on snow,
okay,
with Clister and all that crap. And, you know, I was really obsessed. And I went back, I was working for Mount Spokane on the weekends as a ski instructor. So I talked Skip Wood, who was the head ski instructor of the whole place, to go with me. So we got in there, and we got partway up the peak.
And what month was this?
February.
February, okay.
And we left all our pitons and stuff there, and then Skip had to go back to work. And I just took off work. I was working as an architect then. And I just took off a week, and I thought, I got to get this done. So I found Will Parks. He's no longer with us either, and he's passed away. Will Parks went up with me, and we spent another 4 or 5 days, and we finally did climb it, but it was pretty harrowing.
Yeah.
I tried to describe it in my book.
Well, you almost froze to death, didn't you?
Almost.
Yeah. I think that story to me really, I mean, you know, climbing Everest and Eiger, these are iconic mountains, but outside of this area, no one knows about Chimney Rock, really, right? Or cares.
No,
but you have this drive still.
Yeah, I mean, who cares?
Right. Which sort of is what climbing boils down to, right? Like,
who gives a, you know, I mean.
Right.
I don't know, I look at it now, and you know, you run up there and you touch the top and you do it, but it was still, I had to do it.
Right, right. And you did.
Yeah, it was hard.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
It did answer. You probably, yeah, you could have said that, I guess. It was hard.
It was tough, it was hard and brutal, and but again, I got a lot of satisfaction out of those conquests. They overrode, I had a lot of failures on the route to it, but it kind of overshadowed everything else.
Right. And the way I kind of understood and read your book here, all of this was sort of leading up to some of your bigger climbs in the Himalayas.
Well, I always had in the back of my mind that what I wanted to do, my goal wasn't to be the best rock climber, wasn't to be the best ice climber. I wanted to climb with a 25 to 30 pound pack on my back and do 5-10 climbing, which is the high degree of climbing goes 5-1, 2, 5-2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I wanted to do the hardest type of climbing at 25,000 feet, at 30 below zero, and that's what I set my mind on. I wanted to climb the highest peaks in the Himalayas, and wanted to do the hardest routes. Now, up to that point, well, ask me another question. I'll tell you how I think you're leading into some of these expeditions.
Yeah, you're doing great though. I'm just I'm just listening.
You know, up to that point, in back of my mind, that there were countries that were going after these peaks. These 8,000 meter peaks were a big prize for, let's say, the country of Pakistan. They'd send a group, or Nepal, or the Germans, or the French, or the English. The English were everywhere. The sun never set on their empire.
Right.
Hillary and, you know, all those guys. And the French were big. And I was reading about these expeditions. These expeditions were 1,000 men, $5 million, 400 Sherpas.
6 months.
To put 2 people on the top.
Right.
You know, it was like going to the moon to climb an 8,000 meter peak. And I had a partner that agreed with me. I said, you know, John, you and I could go over there and knock one of these off ourselves. and it seemed like a bizarre thought, but I was looking at the peaks and I said, we could do that.
Right.
And when it came to Makalu, we wanted to prove it. One of the reasons Makalu...
And explain Makalu, just where that is. Give everyone a geographic
Makalu is about
sense.
15 miles from Mount Everest to the east. And it's called the Black Pyramid. It's a beautiful plutonic piece of granite. Solid granite, and it comes to a pyramid. There's 3 great ridges that go to the top. Greatest mountain in the world to me. Anyway, it's a beautiful form of granite, and it is 27,820 feet high. It's the 5th highest mountain in the world. And up on Makalu is this ridge, this west ridge, which is just as straight as a die. It goes 12,000 feet in a straight point to the top. And so what we set our minds on was, let's go climb Makalu, let's do the hardest route ever done in the Himalayas, and let's just take 2 of us or 4 of us. And John convinced me that 4 would be safer than 2. And do it without oxygen, and do it without Sherpa support. And that's one of the reasons the American Alpine Club recognized that peak. That expedition is one of the 10 greatest expeditions of the 20th century.
Right.
When we came back.
Because you're shifting from this old model of sort of almost conquest.
It was
to much faster, much lighter.
Yeah, I mean, it just put all these big expeditions in a pine box.
Right. Hey. That's a quote. But it's true. I mean, and it's sort of, I mean, for those that don't know, that's where climbing has moved now, right? It's not big expeditions anymore. It's 2 people or 1 person. There's so much more of that happening. These very fast, very light ascents. Yeah. You guys were set the pace.
It was a big change to tactics, but it wasn't for everybody.
Yeah. So is Makalu sort of your proudest climbing achievement?
It ranks right up there.
What else?
Oh man, probably my well, I couldn't. If I had to pick my most favorite climb that I've ever done, I would be Mount Vincent in Antarctica. The main reason is I went by myself. I got on the plane, I went to Florida, I got to Florida all the way to Point Arrest. I mean, I was on my own.
When was this?
I came 1989, 90.
Okay.
And I hooked up with Giles Kershaw, who's also passed away. He was an explorer type guy of kite gliding, but he also flew these DC-4s from Point Arenas all the way to the ice cap, but you had to pay him $17,000 cash and to get the trip over and back. And there was 8 of us that got on this plane, and I was still by myself. And then it was 2,400 miles from Point Arenas to the ice cap on Antarctica. And if you've never seen Antarctica, it's like being on the backside of Mars. It's an unbelievable place. I can't hardly describe it, but anyway, they landed his plane, and he said, if the weather's good, I'll pick you up in 3 weeks. If it's not,
And this is just you dropping off?
No, there was 8 of us.
Oh, eight of
eight
you.
climbers who
Okay.
wanted to climb Mount Vincent, but I was by myself. I was independent. And anyway, I pulled it off.
And so the combination of the setting and being there on your own, that all sort of raises it above some of the others.
Yeah, I made it up the peak, got to set on the top of Mount Vincent with no wind. Sat there and looked at the view. You could see about 500 miles in every direction. It's a big mountain.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Over 16,000 feet. It's higher than Mount Blanc. It's a big, wild peak. And the final day took me 24 hours of effort. And in my book, as I describe it, it never got warmer than 30 below zero. So I nearly lost my life on that trip because I had this down suit that I had designed just for me, but I was trying to save 2 or 3 ounces because speed is everything in the mountains. So I thought I'd save about 6 ounces if I didn't have a zipper to zip down so I could go to the bathroom. Well, I had to take the whole top off in the wind.
And 30 below.
And 30 below.
On Mount Vincent.
With a big wind there, and I don't know what saved me, but I would probably be like a gargoyle on the Spokane. And people would be passing me and say, there he is.
Spokane climber. Oh.
Anyway, I'm trying to describe that because everybody wanted to know, how do you go to the bathroom up there? Well,
that's one way. So when did you sort of stop climbing at these really high, really dangerous peaks, the Himalayas and these other places?
I went back, I was 56 years old, and I went back to climb Cho-Oyu, which is the 6th highest peak in the world. It's almost 27,000 feet, and that was in 2004. And then I went back to Mount Fairweather 3 different times, and that's 15,400 feet. That was right up there on my list as one of the greatest times I've ever had in the mountains. But Cho-Oyu, I realized that my body was waning. I couldn't at altitude. I was physically, headaches were more severe. The breathing, I wasn't as fast. I wasn't, and speed was safety to me. And because I would run up and touch the top and then come back down, and that's why I'm still here.
Right. Because you kept moving.
Yeah, I was realizing that things. Now I reached 70. I'm 73 now. Things start really happening to me.
So you were in your 50s when you kind of stopped the bigger expeditions.
Well, I climbed Fairweather when I was 65, and that's a big.
Yeah.
That's one of the world's big peaks.
Yeah. I wonder. So like reflecting back on this, I mean, these are all like even the Antarctica story, right? It's a very intense, intense experience and high emotions and near-death experience. Honestly, how did that affect you once you got back from these trips? How did it, once you were out of that situation, how did you live with that?
Well, when I was a teenager and I would go climb Mount Rainier or I would climb these peaks, and I just looked at the common things that people were dealing with. I'm really thirsty, or I'm really, this and that. I just faded. I mean, I was so heightened in life that I can't describe it. I just couldn't talk to anybody. I said, somebody ran over and took my shoe this morning, and I said, that's not a problem, man. What if you didn't have any shoes?
Right.
Or all the petty little things that people get upset about. I started realizing that, either I'm in a different paradigm than they are, but it taught me to take things a little easier. Maybe the namaste, take things every day as a gift.
Right.
And quit worrying about the little things.
Right.
So you can see how calm I am.
Right. I think you'd probably rather be climbing, wouldn't you?
It is a big release.
So, aside from the cousins asking you to write this book, why kind of change your policy and start to write and talk about these adventures now? What changed there?
Well,
Aside from the cousins.
Eli, I kept diaries and photographs and diaries since I was about 15, and they just kept piling up, and all these people that I'd climbed with, and I'm a really slow writer. I wanted to write this book years ago, but when I met Michelle and we had 2 more kids, I really put my effort into the kids and then. But I was only able to write maybe a page a week to get a refined page that I thought was going to be good. Stephen King writes 15 pages a day, 30 pages a day, just cranks it out, At me, it was a struggle, and I kept struggling, and I went year after year after year, but I had a great partner with Rich Landers. I owe him.
Right. Because he edited it, correct?
He took 750,000 words and condensed it into the book we have, and I worked with him, and without that, I wouldn't have something that people could read. But I don't know if that answered your question, but I wanted to leave something for my family to show where I'd been and what I did, and I wanted to be able to be there with me.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like it's also a really interesting time in the climbing world too. It's changed so much since when you were doing it kind of at the highest level, right? And I guess I'm curious, how does it look to you now? It was in the Olympics for the first time this year. Free Solo was this kind of blockbuster movie. I'm just curious, when you look at the sport now, or it's maybe not even a sport exactly, but when you look at the activity now, what do you think?
Well, there's always been, and like Alex Honnold has put climbing with Free Solo into a different galaxy altogether. The guy is so talented, so good. In the Olympics, there's certain common things, you got the passion, you got the desire, you got the art form, you got the physical part of it, the mental stress, all those things you can have in any kind of any job. I wouldn't want your job. I wouldn't want Rob Cody's job. I couldn't. I just marvel at the production that the newspaper business goes through. I couldn't do it. But I can climb.
But you can climb.
Yeah, and I can watch the good climbers. But it's changed so much, and then again, it hasn't changed. I always got these mental challenges that people want to do one step above or one rock pitch harder. Or some guy did this, so you want to do it a little bit
in the same way that you and Russ Kelly were thinking,
hey,
we could do that faster.
Yeah. Do it faster, better, whatever. It's competition. Still competition. It's a different, a completely different world with all the news media, the iPhone.
Right, you can see video from the top of these peaks. Not possible, not happening. Yeah. So, and I don't know if you all know this, but all the proceeds from your book go to the Dishman Hills Conservancy, which is pretty admirable, I think. I wonder, when you were climbing, kind of at the height of your climbing career, were you thinking much about conservation and sort of some of the ecological and environmental issues that now are kind of, in the forefront of everyone's mind? Were you thinking about that? Did you see that, or was that kind of later in life?
Since I've been doing these, I've been asked, I was thinking about it then, and I would be asked to do a rotary show or whatever, and I'd show slides, and I would say, look at all this pollution that comes from LA up into the Canadian Rockies. And I was showing these slides in the 60s and 70s, and I said, this is coming from cars. When I was born in 1948, 2.8 billion people. Now what is there? We're pushing 8 billion? The population continues to expand. The earth is a finite place. But I started thinking when I got back, I thought, you know, Dishman Hills is one place that I thought I could really do a difference, because we're buy up land, and it takes years.
Right.
It's 50 years of trying to make a park up there.
Right.
Same as Expo or any other park. But if you go up there and, anyway, I was thinking about it, I've been thinking about it my whole life, and now I can give back a little bit for what I can.
Right.
You know, I related to very Reverend Dean Coombs, who his son was a really good friend of mine. And Dean Coombs said, Chris, when I came to Spokane, I was going to save the whole world. Then I'm going to save the city, and I couldn't save the world, but I was going to save the United States. Then I was going to save the city, and now I was going to save my neighborhood, and now I'm trying to save myself.
Right. Right.
So I'm trying to do a little tiny bit of conservation, but it is a necessary thing that people, and it's all done by grassroots people.
Right. Well, it's a beautiful circle, because, I mean, that's where you guys trained there, right? Illegally. You were running through Dishman Hills and trespassing.
I got shot at.
Getting shot at, yeah. You should probably tell that story now that you brought it up. But
Yeah. No, it's a true story. I'm running with my dog.
Yeah.
And I was running across this guy's land on the top of Tower Mountain. And thanks to the Coles family who didn't let people up there. They
Right.
owned the land where Big Rock, or close to where Big Rock was, and they let people drive up there, and there was a trail across there. That was okay, but if you got into somebody else's property, the guy chased me with a Jeep with his rifle. Chased me down. And I, you know,
that's one way
my
to
dog
train.
sat in there, and yeah, he was really pissed off.
And now that's all conserved land, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or a bunch of it.
now we own it, now
Yeah.
people can walk on it. But I was actually running on the Avista line easement. I was trying to stay on the easement there, but we're working with all the different neighbors, and it takes a long time. It takes a generation, you know, and family, and it's important land to people. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to answer your question, it's always been in the back of my mind. I've been able to do something
Right.
for this community. I've grown up here.
And so, kind of speaking of that, I mean, what's the reception been to your book so far? And it's getting picked up by a publisher now, because it was self-published, correct?
I had no confidence in my writing. I wrote the book, I got it done, I thought, you know, I felt really good about that I communicated, but I had no confidence so I self-published it. And I printed 50 books, I almost vomited. I thought, I got all this crap in the basement, I'm gonna add more crap. So I sent one to my oldest daughter, Jay. She lives in Maryland, and she's a dynamite salesperson. She immediately sent it to Roman and Littlefield, and without me even knowing it. And then I was really proud.
And that's a publishing company, just to be
Yeah,
clear.
that's a publishing company. But I came down and I said, I gave it to you, and I said, read my book, and I made a poster of that article you did. But then it just started selling, and I'm happy to say, you know, going on 700 books so far.
Wow.
For a
That's
self-published
almost as
book.
many cousins as you have, right? That's almost as many cousins as you have. Yeah.
Well, they're too cheap to buy. I have to.
So even as
They're worse than climbers.
Yeah. Yeah. Even so, Rob alluded to this even in sort of the story about your mother, right? Climbing's always been sort of a niche, kind of hard to explain activity, and basketball is much more popular.
Oh God! You know, I never wanted to talk about it because you're a lunatic fringe, and you're so far out of the mainstream type thing. But it is you can call it an activity, you can call it a sport. It's all those things to me. To me, it was always, when I looked at those great mountains, I thought, did I have the capability to mentally and physically do that and come back safely? That was what the overriding thing was in my mind. And believe me, I've had more failures than I've had successes in the peaks. I turned around, maybe my success ratio is maybe 40%.
Yeah, and that seems like climbing or any activity in life, that seems like an incredibly valuable lesson.
Yeah.
And
No, I wasn't ever afraid to turn around when the feeling wasn't right.
Yeah. Well, what's next for you, Chris? What are you looking forward to? And
Well, I've got, at home, I've got a climbing gym on my roof, and I get my fix.
yeah, okay. So you're still climbing a little?
On my ceiling,
Yeah.
you know, I got this thing where I climb up and down and there, and it gives me, and then I have a great view of the Spokane and everything. But no, I'm dedicated president of the Dishman Hills Conservancy, and I put a lot of money into it, and I put a lot of time into that conservancy. I'd like to see the whole thing connected before I die. In the property that we're trying to acquire. I would love to see that. We're getting really close, but it's 50-some years. But I put a lot of energy into that, and I put a lot of energy into my trying to make up with my kids for lost time, going fishing and things. My first wife Sharon has passed away. I have a beautiful wife here, Michelle, tonight, who is helped me so much. Excuse me. But between my mother and my wife Sharon and Michelle, that's why I am here tonight.
Thank you so much for coming. Writing the book. Thank you.
There'll always be Annapurnas in the lives of men. Maurice Herzog said that when he climbed the first 8,000-meter peak, and that's what keeps me going.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eli.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you. You look awfully young. Thank you, everybody.
Before we let Chris go, we thought we would have a little bit of Q&A, if anyone would like to ask any questions. So.
Right here. And I'm going to have to hold the microphone just because I'm that way. Chris, about 25 or 30 years ago, there was a group of us in Atlanta for a meeting, and we were staying at the Peachtree there, and I asked you what you were doing to get in shape for your next climb, and you said, well, I take the stairs up to the top of the hotel. I take them 3 times every day. And so I tried that once. There was 74 flights. I about died. So my question is, has anybody done any pulmonary or cardiac studies on you just to see what makes you tick? Do you have high pulmonary function or?
Yes, I do. The answer is bottom line, yes. I've been studied at the University of Washington for my ventilator response, where they take the oxygen out of a high altitude tank, and the last man, until you holler enough, and anyway, till you pass out. But I didn't pass out. I was able to continue breathing in the very, very thin air. I have a very high ventilator response. My VO2 max is about 60, which is, that average astronaut has a VO2 max of about 42. So I have some innate DNA, genetics, whatever you want to call it, that helped me, but I also started at a very early age climbing high peaks, and I think that was more of an, I call it epigenetic mark, that changed my wiring in my body for high altitude. So the answer is yes.
Right over here.
The little bit of climbing that I've done, you talk about climbing, but to me the scariest part is coming down. And,
Yes.
and when it starts to get dark, doesn't coming down scare you?
Well, statistically, in climbing, 90% of the accidents happen when you are going down. That's really a good question. And that's where, on a given day, if you're going to make the summit, you've always got to have that in the back of your mind of where you might have to bivouac or where you might have to stay if you can't make it all the way down. But you have to just be exceedingly careful. And that's one of the reasons I can't climb anymore. I can still go up. My legs are great going up, but when it comes to coming down, I'm pretty rickety. So that's why I'm quitting. I'm not quitting. I'm going on the Selkirk Trust and stuff like that. But going down, to answer your question, is where 90% of the accidents happen.
Thank you.
Right over here.
Yes, enjoying the show very much and looking forward to the book. I was curious, closer to home here, and maybe more in your younger days when you were exploring the Cascades, do you have any favorite climbs in the North Cascades, the McMillan Spires area, Redoubt, Spickard, any of those? And do you have a Fred Becky story?
I really like Washington Pass area, Liberty Bell, and the Mount Silver Star, and then I don't know if you've ever heard of Stehegan, but Cascade Pass. I love that area up there, the Mount Magic Mountain and Mount Forbidden, and the wild, rugged area. I'm not so much attracted to the volcanoes. They're big and high, but I found that closer to home, the Selkirk Crest has got everything needed. I don't know, up by Chimney Rock and Mount Ruthon, it's just gorgeous up there. I just love it.
Thanks for joining us today. All of our videos and discussions are archived on our videos site, which you can access for free. If you feel compelled to buy a ticket, please take that cash and instead make a contribution to the Community Journalism and Civic Engagement Fund via the Inovia Foundation. We appreciate your support.